On today's podcast, we sit down with veteran music supervisor Peymon Maskan. Peymon has been instrumental in shaping the soundtracks of film and TV projects, working with iconic directors such as John Herzfeld and bringing memorable scenes to life. We dive into his journey from a love for music catalogs like the BMG Music Club to becoming a leading figure in music supervision. Peymon also reveals the evolution of music and storytelling, the impact of social media platforms such as TikTok, and the art of music curation. We also explore the democratization of music production and how budget constraints spur creativity and projects. If you're fascinated by how music can transform a scene or want to hear Peymon's insider tips and experiences, you can't afford to miss this. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we have the pleasure of welcoming the innovative and visionary music supervisor, Peymon Maskan. We dive deep into his fascinating journey from his early love of music, sparked by discovering music catalogs like the BMG Music Club, to his first real experience working on a film with director John Herzfeld. Peymon shares invaluable insights about the evolving role of music and storytelling, the impact of digital platforms like TikTok, and the democratization of music creation. We also discuss the common misconceptions about the role of music supervisors, his exciting experiences like the Uber Eats ad with Brian Cox, and how music sync can dramatically boost an artist's exposure, like Marion Hill's Down in the Apple AirPods ad. Peymon even shares personal stories, like his appreciation for artist Jade Thirlwall's creative choices discovered on YouTube, and his work on Dev Patel's Monkey Man, where he blended regional and global music. This is one episode you won't want to miss. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Insiders! Are you an aspiring musician, artist, band, or future music business professional looking to take your career to the next level? Well, look no further. At MUBUTV, we offer personalized career counseling and coaching designed specifically for folks like you.
Imagine having both of us by your side, guiding you through every step of your music journey. Our sessions are tailored to meet your unique needs, focusing on critical aspects of your music career, such as refining your songs, defining your artist story, identifying your target audience, and enhancing your social media presence, just to name a few.
Whether you're just starting out or looking to elevate your existing career, we've got you covered. Our comprehensive approach ensures you get insights on everything from live shows to branding and marketing strategies. We understand that every artist is unique. That's why our coaching is personalized just for you.
And here's the best part. We offer flexible coaching packages that fit any budget. Choose from individual sessions ranging from 30 to 90 minutes, or save with our discounted 4-session packages. Experience custom sessions designed to enhance your music career, with opportunities for greater savings when you choose bundled sessions. Investing in your musical journey has never been more accessible.
Imagine the clarity and direction you'll gain after just one session. The feedback on your songs, the strategies to grow your audience, and the confidence to perform live, all tailored just for you.
So why wait? Don't let uncertainty hold you back. Join us for your free 15-minute discovery call at book.mubutv.com for a transformative coaching experience that will elevate your music career. That's book.mubutv.com.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured guest is veteran music supervisor Peymon Maskan. I've always enjoyed conversations with music supervisors. Why? Because, number one, it is a field of work that is very commonly misconstrued.
Right.
And number two, it is a very, very important and growing in importance, the whole idea of music in visual media.
Right.
Not only in television, but in films, in advertisements,
video
games, and increasingly in different kinds of media online, which is becoming more and more
commonplace. Yeah.
And this was, I thought, a very interesting conversation. You know, one of the things that struck me was when we talked about, his early passions for music. Most music supervisors, not all, but most, do have a passion for music. But as we learned, so much of the job of music supervision isn't strictly about,
right, just listening to music,
just listening to music and making those choices.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I thought was so interesting, but how his knowledge and more importantly, his curiosity over the years, when he talked about how he, it began with the love of music with the BMG Music Club. And I remember that. Like
the 10 for $1.
Yes, in Columbia.
Or a penny, whatever it was.
Yeah, it was 10 for a penny.
Right.
As long as you committed to so many, I think it was 3 or 4 in the next 2 or 3 years,
right,
at full price.
Exactly.
You got and they
and everybody would just get those and then cancel them. They wouldn't pay for the commitments. You get the 10 CDs and just walk away.
Exactly. Yeah. And there were only 2. There was the Columbia Record Club,
right,
and then there was the BMG one, which was the competitor, the RCA, and how that showcased the importance of early exposure to diverse music collections. And I thought, that's such an interesting kind of way to get into a field that, of course, at that time, he didn't know he was going to get into. But I thought that was an interesting way, because a lot of people who are in the field, who are passionate, start out, like sometimes they're musicians.
Right.
Sometimes they just have a genuine curiosity about different types of music. But, here he was a passionate listener.
Yeah. And I thought one of the other things that I liked about this story or the interview that we had with Peymon was the impact of song syncs. We talk about this all the time. A song sync can significantly influence an artist and a product. An example is Marion Hill's Down, which was featured in that Apple's AirPod ad, which dramatically boosted the song streams and exposure. And this is the power of, syncing a picture with film or in this case, a commercial, and how that can make an impact instantly to an artist's career. And we talked about the whole idea of how artists back in the day, 20 years ago or more, that they wanted nothing to do with having their music filmed in ads. But once it started to become more commonplace, then everybody wanted to get into it because they can see the significance of what an impact that can make with film or TV with music.
Yeah, and what's interesting about what you're saying, Eric, is that I believe that the result of what you're talking about was a result of technology.
Right.
Technology made it so that artists could not make the kind of money that they could in the album era, when there was an actual copy model to sell a CD.
Right.
And the consciousness that you're speaking of was, you don't put your music into commercials. That's selling out. That was the cultural consciousness among the artist class.
Yeah.
I mean, you just didn't do that. And today you can find, maybe 1 or 2 artists in the entire world that feel that way. I mean, the 2 that come to mind are U2 and Neil Young.
Right.
I mean, that's it. It's, people don't have that same perception anymore about putting music into commercials.
And I forgot who it was that we had on the show from Gray Advertising, where he talks about, we're not Josh Rubinowitz, where he talked about now it's not selling out, we're selling in. And I just thought that was a great phrase. If anybody hasn't seen that video that you did with him, which was a great video talking about that whole idea of selling in, because we talked about that, or you talked about it with him, about the whole idea about how musicians or artists did not want to have anything to do with having their stuff put, and some artists still don't, but very rare now. Now it's just much more commonplace. So I just thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, it's harder to get exposure, which is why I think that the idea of a sync, or the idea, there's something else behind that. And you made it an interesting point when you talked about the AirPods ad. Is that, and it's not spoken of enough, but I think the important thing is, in terms of raising an artist profile, there are not many songs where a $30 to $50 million campaign are put behind.
Exactly.
That's a very significant point to your thing about raising an artist profile.
Right.
No record company, no matter how much time, energy, or promotion, would be able to put that kind of money into an ad. But yet, if you buy a 6-month campaign on television and that song is played, every single time, and we can think of many
about
ads.
U2, when the U2 came out with that campaign for full
it was their own
they
own thing with
iPod,
Apple.
and that was a genius thing. I mean, obviously
that was the one exception they made,
right?
Which was their
and then
own.
They had a huge failure with putting that other record into everybody's, so it's just interesting how the
culture changed.
The culture changed with that one. Yeah. And then I also think back to also Moby, which, if you recall, Moby had that one record where he placed,
was the lead. Yes.
And that was a big thing. I think that was a big turning point. Song. Was it featured in something, whether it was a movie or commercial?
Synced.
Yeah. And so I thought that I always think back to that Moby record, because I think that was where a lot of shift was starting to take place, and people were starting to make embrace that more, at least from an artist perspective. And
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The other thing that I thought was the most interesting about this conversation with Peymon was how he spoke about the shifts in music supervision. Some of the major changes, include the transition from, I guess, to digital music and the role that social media had in music discovery. And what I mean by that specifically is you have a culture today that has a much, much wider breadth of knowledge and is informed about a much greater breadth of music than ever before. There was a time in music supervision when commercials, for example, would only use iconic songs that you and your grandmother knew about. And that's interesting on how we don't do that anymore.
Exactly.
We now suit the product rather than does everybody know this?
Does everybody know that? Yeah, it's a different take on it, mentality. One of the other things that I thought was his advice for aspiring music supervisors and saying, to aspiring music supervisors, immerse yourself in environments with professionals, learn to, about music licensing and understanding music components due to a steep learning curve. It's the whole idea of what you talked about, that there's this thing that's glamorized with music supervision. I think we do that in the music business. Everybody is glamorized with the idea of like, I'm going to be rich and famous. But when you realize that it's an industry like anybody else and it's a lot of work, And the thing with music supervisors is that you think that you're just, oh yeah, I know a lot about music and that's all I'm going to be doing. And it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're right. And it's, and to that point specifically, what I think he's referring to is learn what music publishing is, learn what master rights are, learn the difference between a song and a master, and how every license has two parts to it that need to be done. You can license a song, but not necessarily the record of that song that Maybe there's 2 or 3 or 4 other versions of it. Learn how to clear something and what that's all about. That's an important part of it in relation to what you were saying. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the idea of working with people who are professionals, volunteering at a music supervision company, working at a music publisher house, working for a sync company, learning how to develop those relationships, because that's what that's all about. When you're a music supervisor and you only have a certain amount of money, how do you get the song you want that they're asking for this, but it costs this? A lot of times you get it because of the relationship. I remember there was a great story that my friend Greg Rice, who used to work at Paramount Pictures, he told this great story about how when Bob Zemeckis, the famous director, was making Forrest Gump, which literally had 130 song cues in it.
And they were huge songs.
They were huge, exactly.
Iconic
songs. And this was in 93, so it was, in a different era.
Right.
But how he had to have, he told me that they must have done 16 or 17 screenings Bob did privately for a lot of these big artists to show them the film, to say, can I use, this is what I want to do. I don't have $400,000 to pay you for the one song, but this is the usage. Can we get it for this? And it was those relationships and that time and energy that he put into it that gave them, and they still ended up with a 2-record set soundtrack for Forrest Gump. So those relationships, even at that level, at the top level of a Tom Hanks Paramount Studios film, is so important, in terms of music supervisors and those relationships and learning that.
And with that, insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured conversation with Peymon Maskan.
Peymon, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you. I always like to start these interviews off with the question, when in your life did you know that music was going to be your professional career path?
Wow. Well, I can go back to the BMG Music Club and receiving those pamphlets of all the different artists that they offer, where you buy one
10 for a penny.
Yeah, and you get a bunch of other ones. And I didn't have any way to get them, but I somehow got the catalog, and I just started circling descriptions of artists. Like I never even heard the music, but I would just circle Bjork, like, oh my God, she sounds incredible. And it took me a while to figure out how to get the CDs, and eventually probably ruin my childhood credit with that whole racket. But yeah, and then, so it really started there. I just felt something different with music and not even hearing it, just the description itself. And then, I don't know, I think I mean, the real moment was I was working with a director named John Hirschfeld on a film called 15 Minutes with Robert De Niro. It was like my first kind of real gig after film school, and, you know, just actually like job that had anything to do with entertainment and what I was interested in, filmmaking. And Dana Sano came in as the music supervisor on this film, and it was like clouds parting and, you know, heaven shining through, just watching her be a music person navigating inside of the film world. You know, in the film world, to my perspective at that point, was pretty homogenous. You know, everyone kind of dressed the same and talked the same and used their own, like, a certain vocabulary. And I was finding myself already, like, not sure if I liked that aspect of it. Like, my individuality felt lost. And then, you know, if any of you know Dana, she's like a very special human being with an incredible energy. And I was very drawn to that. And then we connected, and I ended up, you know, taking the stack of CDs that she would give to the director. And when I was around running errands or whatever I was doing, I would circle my favorite songs and give it back to her. And I didn't realize I was being a music coordinator, but I just was. And eventually it led to us working together for many years. And she became my first real mentor in this business.
Peymon, it's Eric. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Really, really excited to have you on. I wanted to ask you, you know, as a leading music supervisor, do you feel that music is used more today to help tell stories in film and TV than in the past?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think it's like, you know, I think a while ago, the stigma for artists wore off, and they saw the opportunity there, and they themselves became fans of great music and shows. And, you know, music supervisors just kept upping their game until it got to a place where I guess artists and fans alike would really covet and look forward to these great moments. And, you know, you got to credit TikTok for putting the use of music in everybody's, like, I guess, vernacular. You know, how music is used is, I guess, just as familiar to young people as, you know, point and shoot cameras were to me when I was younger. And probably more so, actually, because the learning curve is like nothing. And, you know, I mean, you know, music's subjective. Everyone feels like whatever they're into is the right thing. I think when it gets to being a music supervisor, you have to figure out how to be objective. And so there's still a role and an opportunity, and a massive role, I'd say, for what we do. But I just love how much the use of music has infiltrated culture and is like a driver now, I think.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting hearing your answer, because, you know, you've been doing this for a while. You've been around and you've seen, you know, so much. And, you know, I'm curious, what have been the most significant shifts in the world of music supervision and sync over the last 10 years that you've seen?
Well, 10 years. I mean, 10 years is even like, you know, I guess I started 20 years ago when we were burning CDs, but that was a big shift, just going digital and being able to pitch really quickly. And then I'd say 10 years ago, I think more and more brands found themselves using music, at least in advertising. It's a tough question, because there's some things that have been helpful and some things that have not been helpful.
Well, you mentioned like TikTok, which wasn't, you know, around 10 years ago. And how that's shifted in a profound way, like, you know, bringing music to the culture. Are there other elements that you feel, you know, have really shifted in your world that you've observed?
Well, you know, I think for the making side of things, just people being able to create stuff in their own home studios. I always think about, before that was possible, that out there was someone with an incredible song in their head that they had no idea how to get out or record, and that we never got to hear. And, you know, the democratization of music creation itself has been, I think, the biggest shift. And then the deals that were made to get massive catalogs of music into social media, I think probably were maybe even spurned by the original iTunes deals, are probably the most significant funnel for music into culture and visual culture that we've seen. Yeah, because the music video is not like a money-making endeavor, but people insist on it. But getting your song to trend on TikTok is good for everyone.
Yeah, but you just brought up a really interesting point, which is, you know, the exposure level of music. And one of the things that I find so astonishing about youth culture today is the depth of their historic knowledge. 17, 18-year-olds who know Pink Floyd, who know Led Zeppelin's work, who know all these bands, Crosby, Stills, Nash. I mean, they're aware of this stuff. They know Bowie. And these are people like Led Zeppelin hadn't, put out music in 44 years, but they're aware of that. And it's an interesting kind of phenomena when you talk about the point you were making about just, the access. And I think on a deeper level, that kind of access became a part because of technology, because of everybody being able to have as much music as they want, whenever they want, however they want, on any number of platforms they want, and they were able to have it for free.
Yeah, and we're standing on decades of popular music. Decades. We're decades beyond tribal and folk and regional. So there's so much music to look back at, and so when you're looking at a few decades, which I'd say 70s, 80s, when you're like film is starting to adopt music in a really more culturally significant way. They only had a few decades really to look back at.
Right.
We're now standing on so many amazing decades, and you can just pluck the best of the best. And when you collect it together, it's a massive amount of music. So cool. Like, that's why for me, like, I love looking backwards, but for me, the biggest challenge is really looking at what's the best of the best right now, because it's so much harder, and it is more exciting to me to get it into things that people don't know about yet. So that's kind of where my focus is turned. But I'm fascinated by how things look when you look backwards, and the amount of great music you can see from that perspective.
Peymon, what are the most common misconceptions about the role of music supervisor do you see in your estimation?
I think one is that we pick the song, although it happens.
Right.
That those are moments of pride, but typically we're creating an environment where great music can get selected, and we're putting really great options in front of a director or a creative director, or whoever it might be, so that whatever they choose is amazing. So we're not necessarily. Sometimes I just finished a ad for Uber Eats with Brian Cox, and they pitched the idea, and I just texted my band, my team, my band. I texted my team, we should look at this song, and it was for the Swingle Singers, and it was the first song we pitched, and it went all the way, even though we pitched another 50 ideas. So it does happen, and I think some of the biggest things I did for Apple were my first idea, but it almost always is an exploration, and it's a discovery, and if they do it really well, it actually elevates the conversation around the story and makes people think about it differently. You imagine just like bringing in a great actor, all of a sudden you see the story a little differently, you see the character differently. You always want to be doing the same thing with music, I think, is like, how do I not just deliver what they're expecting, but there's like 2 or 3 steps beyond what they're expecting that I can put in front of them, and now I'm a part of the creative conversation, and I get really excited about that.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. I'd like to ask you then, just to follow that up, when you're selecting music for a project, beyond the creative, what other factors are informing your musical choices for a project?
Well, it's like, budget's always a big thing. Although, I try to land a bunch of ideas on budget, and I try not to hold back anything great that might be outside of budget. Have these songs has anything been used before like this? Like, we're telling the same stories over and over again, just kind of new flavors. And there's a reason, where stories and storytelling allow, I guess, groups of people, culture, to find the lines of what we think is okay and not okay, and what are, the cultural norms. And so we'll tell the same rom-com over and over again because, maybe he shouldn't have left her, at the restaurant, or maybe he should have said it this way, or, and these little things are just constantly plastic. And so how have people used music in a scene like this before? And do I want to hit the same nail on the head, or is there something else to say here? Sometimes I'll think like, well, who's the artist who just represents this feeling in culture? Is there someone who feels like the ultimate romantic, or the dangerous boy you shouldn't fall in love with, or whatever it might be? So sometimes I'm not even trying to actually nail this scene. I'm just trying to tie it to something that harmonizes with it that people already know. And then, then there's all kinds of factors. Like if you have a record deal, you're considering what artists exist on that label. If you're, then there's the ages and the demographics and stuff like that all come into play, which I think kind of create an overall strategy for the project. Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is budget. It's the biggest factor. It almost always it leads everything, because if you have unlimited money, whoever the creative is they're just going to pick their favorite song that they already love, because why wouldn't you? It's so fun. The second you have money limitations, well, now you got to talk to your music supervisor. Now you got to find new ideas that you might not know about yet. And then all of a sudden I get to do the fun part of my job. So I would love to have all the money in the world, but luckily I've had so many experiences where I haven't, and been able to find a song that even if I had all the money in the world, I would have gone after that song. It was the best song. And that's kind of the goal, I think.
Hey, Insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured interview. Stay tuned, because we've got so much more value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor.
Hey, Eric, as an artist, what do you find are the most challenging aspects to a music career, especially when you're starting out?
Well, I think one of the first things is just trying to get the direction of who you are as an artist, where you want to go, where you want to be. And, we've talked about it on the show a lot. Who is your target audience? Who you are? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? What do you think would resonate with an audience? And so those are some of the things that I would feel being a new artist. Obviously, what I know now is different because I know these things. But for people that are out there, like our audience, that don't have necessarily any direction to go, would be the first things that I would start off with.
And having the songs that
Absolutely.
incorporate those elements that you're speaking of into it. That's so important today.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why we started MUBUTV and why we started this new consulting service that we're offering to all of our insiders out there, because that is another one of the big things. I mean, that is the big thing, is like having the great songs. That's what it really starts off. Our friend Don Grierson always said, it always starts with a great song. So that's probably, besides putting together what your audience and what your target audience is the single most important thing. Where are your songs at currently today? Are you collaborating with people? Are you trying to go out to networking events where you can connect with other songwriters and stuff like that? So
yeah, and what are your strengths?
Exactly.
Are you a strong lyric writer? Are you a strong melody writer? Are you a strong musician, a player?
Right.
And it's really important to get really strong clarity on those issues before proceeding.
I totally agree, Rich. And, with our consulting services, we offer a myriad of different packages, and we've made it super affordable for everybody. So, if you guys are interested out there in connecting with us on a coaching call, you can visit book.mubutv.com and start off with a free 15-minute discovery call.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We start with an initial 15-minute call where we can get a sense of who you are, what are the issues that you specifically have, right, and want to work on.
Exactly.
And we can go from there. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we tailor everything to your needs. It's not like a cookie cutter thing. We kind of really want to get to know who you are as an artist, where you at today, what's the snapshot of you as an artist today, and then start trying to craft something that's tailor-made for you. So again, if you're interested, visit us at book.mubutv.com for your 15-minute discovery call.
Yeah, because it worked for that project, for that scene at that time. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a great segue to the next question. When you're putting together your various musical choices, for the director, producer, or showrunner of the project, how many choices do you offer for each song needed?
For an ad, it's quantity. I give an unlimited amount of songs. I almost always don't limit how much I give, because I typically make most of my money if the song lands. So I'm very incentivized to just keep giving ideas. So I almost always make blanket deals and just keep thinking about it until it's landed. In film, you're going to want to really be at like 3 to 5. That means you might have pulled 25. And by the time you get to 3 or 5, you look like a genius. But, a director is going to want to see your point of view. And if you have 20 songs in there, there's really no point of view. It's a shotgun. You kind of you got to be bold enough to just really, I guess, put your perspective on the line or forward, I guess, put your perspective forward and be ready to have a conversation. They may not like it, but typically in those situations, I'm giving them what I think they want and then using that to ask questions like, oh, I did that soul track you like, but everyone in the scene's so young. So I thought, why wouldn't I try a younger version? Here's the second song. It's it's kind of like maybe what soul is today, and then, that kind of felt like, oh, I'm being too pop culture-y, so what if I don't know what it would be. What if if I found a remix of a thing you already know? I don't know what it is, but I typically try to have all my ideas like lily pad one to the next, so that you can like lead someone into some deeper thinking that might be beyond where they started.
No, that makes sense. To further that, can you share an example or talk about an example of a particularly challenging collaboration that you've had in your work with directors or producers? And also, how did you navigate the differing visions to achieve a cohesive musical outcome?
I don't know if I would say anything specific about anyone in particular.
Well, you don't need to name names, but just if you can maybe
the circumstances,
right? Yeah. The circumstances, yeah, obviously.
I don't. It's like I'm trying to think of how to say this without like being too revealing. But I'll say almost every problem I've ever had, I can say comes down to myself.
Oh, okay, interesting.
I can't really blame a director because they're the director, and most of the issues I've had are because I'm unwilling to accept their way of seeing things, and more in my youth than I think now. I'm kind of too old for those shenanigans. But I think
it was your stubbornness and hard-headedness that you were trying to get your point across, and
or like to prove them wrong or to be right or something like that. Which these are not interesting things to me anymore. I think to me, I kind of have these. Sometimes I have this feeling when a director says something or a creative says something, and I'm kind of like, I don't know if it's that. I think it's this other thing, and immediately I'm on the wrong track. Immediately I've lost my ability to listen and hear and see something from a different perspective. So that if I do have a differing opinion, it's got some grounding in what the director actually wants. I think most directors, if they don't feel like someone's hearing them, they start to just kind of dismiss them and tune their perspective out. And, that's the nature of film or with a showrunner on TV is like, it really all goes down to one person, and everyone's there to kind of focus their vision and create options to their vision. But, at the end of the day, it's their butt on the line. So I almost always, if there's some difference or something like that, I just need to I realize that I need to take a step back and explore their idea more until the reason I don't like it makes sense, but not in an opinionated way, but like, oh, I don't know, this is what's rubbing me. It doesn't feel congruous to the story. And they might say, yeah, that's what I want. I want it to feel exactly opposite. And you go, great. Well, here's 3 ways to do that, or, whatever it might be. But the second you get to a place where you start blaming somebody else, you lose all your power and you lose all your options, because then you're just at the whim of how bad you think they are. You're just like a subject in the situation. And I think it's important to constantly think about, how do I keep myself creative despite terrible direction, no vision, right. Whatever it might be, and the worst way to be creative is to just put it all on someone else and be like, I got nothing, or that's a terrible idea. I can't do that,
Yeah, it's an interesting revelation that I think that you're the first music supervisor that's brought that up, whether it's, that it's something from within. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to ask you, Peymon, can you think of any examples where a sync placement had a significant impact on an artist's career?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think like sometimes it's hard to measure. It's like a feeling, right? But I've been lucky enough to be involved in some things with artists early enough. Billie Eilish did her first original song for an Apple ad that I worked on with my team at Media Arts Lab, and Jesse Calicow in particular, who was leading it. But we had been forming this relationship with Billie and her team for a little bit, and she hadn't hit the stride that she had hit. But we did something with her that's still probably one of her greatest, like most underrated songs. If you look on the internet, it is rated the most underrated Billie Eilish song called "Come Out and Play." And but if we hadn't done anything, she still would have blown up. So I don't know if we take any credit there. There was a song called "Down" by Marion Hill, which I had put into it was the first AirPods ad. So And this actually is a good example of like how it affected the artist, but also how it affected the product. Because up until then, my perspective is that people were saying it looked like, the toothbrush tip, that people had those in their ears, and people hadn't quite gotten what it was yet. And this incredible ad came out, directed by Sam Brown, that had Little Buck in it. And I read the script, and the first song that came to mind was the song Down by Marion Hill. And the song had already been out for like a year and a half. So the ad exploded, and the artist went from like a couple thousand streams a week to a few 100,000 streams a week.
Wow.
And this was like many years ago. So the numbers were pretty significant for the time. And then I started getting calls from friends, contacts and whatnot all over the world saying that they heard it, in China or here or there. And that was kind of mind blowing to hear. They never like exploded as a band. But the song itself kind of had its moment in culture. Yeah. And then I was lucky to, there's a lot of songs that I put into things that later blew up that I was a part of, but I think that's probably the best example.
All right, that makes sense. I want to talk about another aspect of your work, which I think has emerged, especially in the era of streaming, especially over the last 5 years, which is basically, Peymon, has the global nature of film and especially television influenced your work as a music supervisor with regards to your choices of music in terms of catering to diverse cultural audiences today? Or is it strictly project specific?
It's a good question. I mean, I just did this film, Monkey Man, with Dev Patel, that Jordan Peele produced and put through Universal.
Oh, yeah.
I love doing that film. And it's a good example of like a global film.
Right.
But that doesn't just use music from India.
Right.
There's a few choice moments from India, with Indian music. But, I think the original conversation with Dev is, when we travel the world, you hear regional music, but it's mixed with pop music from all over the world. And so I think that kind of applies everywhere, so you don't have to have anything that's like regionally relevant unless it's just an amazing song for a moment. I do think there's more like people are really pushing to get non-English songs in, ads that play in North America, or, there's a little bit more blurring of kind of what's considered acceptable, which I think is really, really good for music and music culture. But yeah, I mean, you can do something in English that just goes all around the world because it's a great song. It's funny because you're saying, how do I consider it? So like, I would say for any project, I'm looking for the absolute best music possible. And I'm looking to create surprise. And a lot of times it's music that might not be from America, and it might be from around the world.
Precisely, yeah. And there's an openness to that today that wasn't there perhaps maybe 5-10 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, you think about how not scarce American music is to American ears. And scarcity is like this, it's just this, unfortunately, this idea that's kind of gone by the wayside with all the digital we have. But music that you've never heard before, that's in a culture you've never heard before, I think it tickles a different part of the brain. And,
right.
Sometimes you don't want to do that. You don't want to be pulling people out of a scene or out of a moment. But if you can find the right kind of moment, that stuff, that's a really great tool. Non-American or non-Western music. Oh, great tool.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Throughout your life, are there any books or films that have been particularly inspirational to you that you can share with the audience?
The most influential thing to me was a cinematography book. And it really just was, it opened my eyes to kind of this subconscious effects on the viewer of, for this book, it was about like, how do vertical lines feel? How do horizontal lines feel? How do, when an actor walks from one point in a room to another point, if they take a direct line, you feel safe. If they meander, you don't feel so safe for them. You worry about them. And it was these concepts that had nothing to do with music that just opened my eyes to the power of choice making, within a scene or within a film or an idea itself. The choices you can make are very, very powerful. And I think a lot of times we don't even know how many choices are available to us. And, music is more limited, but it's kind of not, I think there's a lot of things you can do if you're paying attention to the subconscious kind of effects on people.
Let me ask you, Peymon, what advice would you have for those who are interested in pursuing a career in music supervision?
Well, I would say be around get yourself in a situation where you can be around people doing it, obviously. Have a point of view, learn how to license music, learn all the mechanics of what it takes to get music cleared and what all the components are of music, because it's a high, how you say it? There's a steep learning curve there. And once you get over it, you're in rarefied air that you even understand that stuff. And listen to as much music as you can. I think we've fallen victim in our industry to briefing and doing a lot of briefs, and I do them constantly. I'm not like above this at all, but really I think the most powerful choices I've ever made as a music supervisor is because of music that I went and pursued myself, not stuff that was fed to me that is also being fed to everybody else at the same time in our business. There's a huge stream of music that any of us can dip our cup into at any moment and come up with a bunch of great ideas. But you can also source your own, and it'll be different than anybody else. And if you really want to find your voice, or at least find a signature, you got to go create it yourself. And then you also need to know what's happening in the industry, what's in that stream, because everyone else is paying attention to it too. You don't want to miss anything in there. But the real goal, like the second you're briefing every project, every scene out, to get ideas from the business and the industry and, incredibly talented people out there. But the second you're relying on that 100%, I think you might need to reprioritize how much time you give to listening, because that's why we all got into this. We listen to music. We love music, but it takes something. I find myself as a dad and a business owner and all that stuff, my ability to listen to music has slowed down, and I've become very efficient at it, so I have super efficient tools that when I like something, I never forget it. My tagging and stuff allows me to recall anything that I've ever loved. So I've had to become more efficient, but so much of my goal in life right now is how to get myself more time to just sit around and listen to music.
It's an interesting point, Peymon, because we live in an era, and you know this from being in the business for 20 years, we live in an era where we have more choice than ever before, but we also, as you point out, have far, far more access to a wider and deeper variety of things. So when, you go and pursue, different kinds of things, the pool that you can pursue that from is extremely vast and profoundly deep today.
Endless. Yeah.
It's endless. And that's what makes it, I think, so interesting. But you've also pointed out the great dichotomy in that, we also have lives. We also have families. We also have, other things that we need to do. And it does make you question how much time, energy, commitment, and focus am I going to be giving to, searching out new music or researching new things. And, you've pointed out that you've become extremely efficient at it. I think that's always the challenge. And I think it's always a challenge too, just on a broader spectrum, not only in music supervision, but in life with careers. I mean, the longer you're in this business, the more people we know who do not have strong, life and career skills. That it's way, way out of balance, and not to go too far down into that, but it's an interesting point that you're bringing up for the reasons you're bringing it up.
Yeah. And my inbox, I have hundreds of emails a day from people trying to get me to listen to their music. And, if I think about all the great music I'm missing at any moment, it would make me nuts, because there's so much out there. I know I'm missing great stuff. It kind of kills me. But you need a life to have a perspective on the music. You need that. That's just as important. My biggest trick I'll share is I really pursue, most of my music discovery is now on YouTube.
Interesting.
And I can watch a video of an artist and in 15 or 20 seconds know more about them than listening to 3 songs of theirs on a playlist.
Oh, interesting.
Because it's not just the music, it's their style, it's the way they look, the way they, their all the other kind of creative choices that they made in their video, the comments, you're immediately in a conversation with a bunch of people about the music. It's the greatest tool that exists for music supervisors is YouTube.
Interesting. It's the first time we've heard that.
Yeah. That is a very interesting perspective.
So you're basing decisions too on all of those non-creative qualities, how they presented themselves, all that kind of thing is going into your decision making as well?
I mean, it just helps me get to know who they are, There's this pop artist named Jade, and she's from a band called Little Mix. Very like mainstream band that I never really liked them that much personally. But this girl Jade is making like just burrowed into my brain. And I felt that when I heard a couple of her songs, and then I went and watched her on YouTube, and I'm completely obsessed now because of all the insane choice making she's involved. And you just see her personality. You saw her before in this like female supergroup, and now all of a sudden she's this individual. And how do you make, as a listener, how do you make the transition from where she was to where she wants to be with just listening to music? It's gonna take so long, and it'll probably be fun, but in a business where we need to understand things really quickly, the visual is everything.
Peymon, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
I think through my website, there's something there.
What's your website, if you can just share it with the audience?
Yeah, it's www.radish.mx.
Beautiful.
For Radish Music, that's me and my team of incredible music supervisors, Alex Stern, Jenna Wilson, and Gemma Schladow. And yeah, that's where you can get us.
Wonderful. Peymon, we want to thank you so much for doing this. We really, really appreciate it. It's been such an interesting conversation on so many levels. So thank you again.
Thank you. And can I do a shout out for something?
Sure.
So we have a newsletter that you can get through the website, and it's written by Alex Stern, and sometimes the rest of our team participates. But it's like an act of generosity. There's very little plugging of our stuff unless we think it's relevant culturally. But it's 100% geared towards music people, visual people, creators. And in one newsletter, you get up to speed on so many cool things happening in music. There's a video playlist as well as an audio playlist. So check that out.
Fantastic. Absolutely. And that's available on your website, correct?
Yeah. And it's called Music Matters.
Beautiful. Okay, great. Really interesting conversation, I thought. Wow. This and here's the thing, Eric, one of the things that sticks with me about this conversation was, that point that we got into in the discussion, which is the vast knowledge that youth of today, which is aided by technology, YouTube, the internet, that emphasizes the importance of accessibility to historical music. We see that with that famous thing of the guy skateboarding on the Fleetwood Mac.
Right.
I see it in my students who have incredible knowledge of Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin, bands that have not been around making music for over 30 years.
Right.
The depth of knowledge that they have in terms of what they're exposed to and how that impacts their understanding when they see things in visual media today, not only in movies and TV, but also in commercials, makes for a much richer music experience. I thought that was an interesting point because it's not something that we could have talked about 15, 20 years ago.
Right.
That whole aspect of youth really having that knowledge and understanding is a result of technology.
Right.
And the access
to bridge that gap.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Rich. Also, one of the other things that I thought was interesting, his take on self-sourcing music, where, he quotes, and I quote, "It's important to self-source music rather than rely solely on industry briefs to develop a unique signature." And I thought that was just a unique thing. I mean, he had a couple of very unique points of things that he fought against with people because he felt things should be a certain way, but he learned to kind of take a step back. But I thought that was one of the things that I thought was very interesting where he talked about that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, one of the things that he spoke of that I remember in relation to your point just now was, it's that whole exploration of new music. I think he spoke about having a preference for discovering new and lesser known music as a source of inspiration and challenge rather than just going on the familiar and the tried and the true.
Right.
Which shows his own sense of adventurousness. It shows his own sense of, wanting to discover something new. And that, I think, is something that time, the era we live in, really allows for today. That perhaps in another era, when we were in the copy model of physical and, what we listened to and what we heard was much, much more limited in that era than it is today, than that possibility. But to Peymon's point, it's more about the adventurousness of being open to wanting to hear new and exciting things.
I also thought his take on narrative impact, and we've talked about this a lot, music significantly impacts the narrative and the creative conversation, and budget constraints play a primary role in selecting music for projects. This is exactly what you were talking about, where there is not those budgets. You talked about earlier in the show about the Forrest Gump reference about, they had these iconic songs. I mean, I didn't know some of those stories, so you enlightened me when you were talking about it, because I would have thought that the budget with that would have been $100 million, because those are all such iconic songs. And so the fact that they were able to finagle getting them to come and see, because that was an icon, because it was talking about, even though it was a fictional character, it was talking about a very significant time
in history,
in music, where music was part of the culture.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Music, that was a central role of that movie, even more so than obviously the story was great and everything, but the music was just as powerful as the story. It played the line, that story played itself because of the music. And so I thought it was interesting that he talks about this, because you mentioned that about how sometimes you don't have the budgets to get these big songs, and you have to find a way to kind of finagle and make it work and still make an impact. And I think that's one of the things that he was, trying to express with that.
Absolutely. And in the case of Gump, it was a matter of getting individually some of those bigger artists on board with it. But, this was a really interesting conversation, and one that covered a lot of very, very significant points. And I thought, for our listeners, hearing about keeping an open mind, about music supervision, and about the role that music has now in visual media and will continue to have, I think, is a very, very important one. So we hope that you enjoyed it for that purpose, and that purpose, even on its own. I think, like Peymon said, be open to discovering something new. Be open to the journey. That's what it's all about. Never, ever, ever lose that sense of curiosity.
Hey, Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes and our space. You can also find us at social media at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter X, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Music Business Insider video series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.